Good morning. I am Joachim Pissarro, and I am delighted to be with you this morning and to discuss a few very significant group of works at the Musée d'Orsay, namely the impressive handful of works that represent the key moment in Van Gogh's career, the moment when he decided to go to the south, more precisely to go to Arles. So you see now a map of the town at the time when Vincent van Gogh arrived. You see to the upper right corner the Place Lamartine, that is the place that was facing the so-called Maison Jaune, the yellow house, which Van Gogh inhabited, and eventually, as we know, Gauguin joined him there. This was the beginning of an absolutely extraordinary adventure, and one that I think we can safely say that this transformed entirely the history of modern painting in not only France but in Europe. So here's the house in question. What I find interesting is a letter that Van Gogh writes to Émile Bernard in March 1888, and I want to quote it to you. He says, "I want to begin by telling you that this part of the world, where he is, seems to me as beautiful as Japan." Now, has Van Gogh been to Japan? No, he's never been to Japan. But let me continue. So he says to Bernard, "As beautiful as Japan for the clearness of the atmosphere and the gay color effects, the joyful color effects, you might say also. The stretches of watermark make patches of a beautiful emerald and a rich blue in the landscapes as we see it in the Japanese prints, pale orange sunsets making the fields look blue, glorious yellow suns." So in other words, here you have a very interesting snapshot of Van Gogh's mindset, which is that he relates to reality literally through the medium of works of art. When he talks to Bernard about Japan, he means to us Japan as I know it through the Japanese prints. But he doesn't need to explain that, because to him, Japan is those Japanese prints. And so there's a very interesting conflation right from the get-go in Van Gogh's mind between the real and the art. And what is going to happen here is what Van Gogh goes to the south, goes to Arles, with a much more ambitious plan than certainly than Cézanne going back to Aix-en-Provence, or than, I would say, almost anybody traveling to the south, Monet to the Mediterranean, Renoir to the Mediterranean, many of them, and eventually almost everybody would go to the south. But with Van Gogh, it had a more than an existential dimension. It was almost like a life ambition. He writes to his brother, to Gauguin, and tells them that he wants to create them a school of the South. So he goes there with a clear intention to change the data, to change the stakes of the art world, per se. So let's look at the next images. And you see here something very interesting that happens. I mean, obviously, we don't have Instagram, we don't have WhatsApp, in iPhones or anything like that. And Van Gogh, you know about the relationship between Vincent and his brother. Van Gogh is in constant touch with Theo. Theo, who's not just, as is sometimes claimed, his benefactor, his Samaritan, good-hearted brother. Yes, he is that to a degree, but he is fundamentally Vincent's art dealer. And he buys pretty much the entire extent of Vincent's art production against sums of money. It is Theo who pays for the yellow house, and in exchange of which Vincent sends the production he sends regularly to his brother, who is going to attempt to sell it, but with very little success. So that I want to mention this because if you think about it, the myth that we often hear that Vincent never sold a single painting is completely wrong. He sold almost the entirety of his career to his brother, Theo. It is his brother who, unfortunately for him, I mean, or unfortunately for us, because this became, most of the collection became the core of what we see now, the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam, but the brother could not sell the paintings, but not Vincent. So what I find interesting also is that in that relationship between Vincent and Theo, Vincent is always very keen, very eager to show his brother his own production. And as I said, since I'm assuming that today Vincent would use his iPhone and send snapshots of the paintings he did. But we have the luck that none of these social media existed then. No communication existed other than written communication, and Vincent scrupulously, almost religiously, draws to Theo images of his own paintings. So you have these kind of mini relays, the kind of another filtering, another mediation here, artistic mediation through the act of drawing, pen and ink drawing, and you see how incredibly vibrant and already so intense and so unusual Vincent van Gogh's style is through his pen and ink. So these, the painting, the Arles night scene is one of the key paintings in the collection of the Musée d'Orsay, La Nuit Étoilée. And what I find interesting, so that is a sister piece to the perhaps better known painting at the Museum of Modern Art. But I will tell you that I know many colleagues of mine, curators, art historians, who find the Orsay painting actually much more interesting, exciting than the MoMA painting. To me, to be honest, this is not really a question. I find the two works, and you know the MoMA painting very well, so there's no need to give you a reproduction of it. But what's interesting is that the two exist side by side, and we're going to see another example of this situation with the Yellow Night. What is fascinating in this painting is that you find a combination of extreme realism, realism is maybe not the word, I mean, of extreme care to give an accurate depiction of what he sees at the time. Namely, we know that because of the letter he sends to Theo, we know that he sees right in front of him the Great Bear. And in fact, if you see, starting from the upper left center, yes, there is indeed a progression of stars that does depict the constellation of the Great Bear. So there's that degree of care to interpret accurately what he sees, together with this kind of intense emotions and expressivity that Van Gogh deploys, unfolds in the rendering, and the relationship between the stars, for instance, and their very vivid reflections in the water is one of the examples that one can look at. And what's interesting is when he depicts those, look at the text, with the starry sky above, with the Great Bear, with the pink and green sparkle on the cobalt blue field of the night sky, while the light of the town and its harsh reflections are of a red, gold, and green tinged with bronze, painted at night, period. So this interest of depicting reality at night becomes one of the most perhaps tangible features of this extraordinary production that Van Gogh unfolds through his time at Arles, which is really very different. I mean, he's always been interested in night. We know this. I curated an exhibit on Van Gogh's paintings that night, but really it becomes very intense during this Arles moment, and I'll have more to say about this. So we see this letter, this little letter that you just saw was addressed to a fascinating character, Eugène Gogh. Eugène Gogh was a Flemish, a Belgian artist. Therefore, you may know that Flemish and Netherlandish are almost identical languages. So the two men were most certainly dialoguing in Flemish together. And Gogh was a very interesting guy because not only was he a poet, but as the painting, his famous portrait is called the Poet, but he's also an artist. And his sister, Anna Gogh, is an artist herself, and is one of the very important, maybe one of the most important key figures in the 19th century, the late 19th century, in that she's a founder of a very important modernist, early modernist group called Les 20, the 20, Belgium, to which many Impressionists and Neo-Impressionists will participate. Pissarro was one of them. So this Gogh is a very important guy. Their parents, Eugene and Anna's parents, are very, very wealthy industrialists. The firm actually continues to exist today, Villeroy and Gogh, tile ceramist factory of huge, huge scale. And hence, Gogh and his sister were able to amass and to acquire a very, very important collection. Now, what you see, Gogh was very close to Van Gogh. What I find interesting in this particular painting, which you recognize, I'm sure, is the way that Van Gogh, in my opinion, sort of almost lends his friend his own features. You know, he sort of emaciates the feature, the contour of the face, the short hair, which we know Eugene Gogh did have, is kind of almost exaggerated. I mean, there's a real, it's almost like a kinship between the two artists. And the fact that Van Gogh uses as a background this reference to the Starry Night in Arles brings Gogh within, literally within the pictorial world of Van Gogh himself. And you notice that he sort of dresses him down. Here, Gogh just wears this simple yellow jacket. On the photograph that we see, he is a very wealthy guy, and so he is indeed able to afford much better clothes than Van Gogh was able to afford himself. So very soon, this very ambitious concept of the School of the South takes formation, becomes a reality when Vincent manages to convince his brother Theo to send the money to Gauguin, convince Gauguin to come back from Brittany, which is the northwest part of France. It's 2 days of traveling at least from the south of France. Gauguin is not at all happy about the idea at the beginning, but wanting the money, needing the money from Theo, he kind of sort of reluctantly accepts to go down. What you need to understand is that from the beginning, Gauguin had met Van Gogh. He was by a few years his elder. Gauguin had already an extraordinary aura in the late Impressionist and the post-Impressionist world in Paris, and had a certain ascendant on Van Gogh. And you've seen most likely the films on Van Gogh when this is quite heavily featured. He expected to find a kind of a beginner artist who was proving to become original and interesting. He did not expect, Gauguin did not expect to find in Van Gogh, in the South, the explosion of pictorial originality, richness, and density of pictorial concentration that he found in Van Gogh when he arrived. So this is the Arlesienne is one of the models that Vincent and Gauguin shared together. We're going to see in a second the drawing of the same model by by Gogh. There we go. And so we have also a painting of Arlesienne, who was in fact known as Madame Ginou, the person who owned a cafe where they spent a lot of time together. And so here comes this very important letter, when basically what you read between the lines is Vincent's gratitude to his brother for having made that possible. So as he sends a telegram to Theo. You know, telegram is a very expensive form of communication at the time. It means that this is really something extremely important. So as you learned from my telegram, Gogh arrived in good health. He even gave me the impression of being in better shape than me. He's very interesting as a man, and I have every confidence that with him we'll do a great many things. He'll probably produce a great deal here, and perhaps I shall too, I hope. So you can tell that there is in this moment a tremendous investment of hope that Van Gogh puts into this moment. Gauguin is completely shocked when he arrives in Arles. He doesn't expect anything like what he's seeing. And I think that one of the responses from Gauguin's part, I mean, it becomes like a sort of complex game of chess, that the two of them are going to play, with Gauguin always having to have the upper hand. And he realizes immediately, Gauguin is a very shrewd guy, that there is that fundamental attachment in Van Gogh's practice to sit in front of the motif. Van Gogh, even though nobody would call him a realist, Van Gogh starts his paintings from a very realistic premise. And so this particular painting is a kind of challenge that Gauguin sends to Van Gogh. This painting was not done from the reality, it was done from memory. And you can tell that I think myself that Van Gogh is not quite as comfortable in this painting as he is with almost any other paintings. He sort of has to invent again. Here's a different story. This is the painting at Yale, where Van Gogh would spend many nights. This is the cafe next door to their house, where you can tell the degree of the vivacity of his rendering of the reality. So I would like to show you then another aspect. So this is a very, very interesting triad, you might say, a trio of paintings. This is the third of a group of 3 paintings that Van Gogh produced, depicting what I would call his microcosm. It is not just his bedroom. It is not just La Chambre Jaune. It's much more than that. It's the world within which he evolved for the period during which he was in Arles, most of it anyway. And so he starts with this particular painting, which he sends to his brother. The painting arrives in Paris with a hole or damage. Theo wants to send it back so that Vincent repairs it. Instead, Vincent convinces him to repair the painting, to reline it, and then send it back to the south. So this painting goes back and forth between Paris and Arles. And at that point, Theo's asking him to do a second version. The second version, here we are, is now in Chicago. That is not the Orsay version, which is a third version. So you suddenly have 2 paintings, right, which Van Gogh sends to his brother Theo. He considers the second one, the Chicago one, certainly one of the best. The third one doesn't exist yet. And then finally, he produces a third version, which is a kind of concentrated version of the other 2, which he does. It's reduced in size, so it's slightly smaller than the other ones. And he does it he calls it a reduction, actually. He does those with a very clear idea of who it is for. It is for his mother and their sister. And he's sending them a kind of representation of what he does best, a sort of concentrated version of his own world. And I find this group of 3 paintings absolutely riveting. There's so much that could be said about them, so much that Vincent himself said about them. what I showed you very briefly, a painting that actually Van Gogh compares these paintings to when he writes to his brother, and that is a painting of books. One of the things that we don't often know, we don't often talk about, is the fact that Vincent was a voracious reader. He wrote, spoke, read 4 languages, of course, French and Dutch, but also English and German. And he collected poetry, literature. He read all 4 languages absolutely fluently, and is himself a great writer, as you see through his own letters. Vincent van Gogh is an extraordinarily complex, rich inventor. I use the word inventor because it's much more than just a great artist. He is somebody who created a new way of seeing, a new method of applying paint on the canvas, a new method of drawing, and a new world, basically. And so here we are.